Blake's heart hammered in her chest. Her body shook as she watched a great cloud of dust billow up from below, where Jaune fell. Where he fell after dragging her back. The white uniformed men and women approached carefully, weapons trained on a disturbance. One held their arm up for the others to wait and crept forward. The jagged and cracked tarmac cut into her palms as she gripped the edge tighter. If the person made one move, if they even looked like they might hurt him, she would jump down and attack them, no matter what the consequences. It was so hard to watch and wait as the people below approached his body. It felt like an eternity, during which every muscle in her body tensed. Her breath came out in short gasps, eyes wide as she fought her instinctive urge to rush down and stand before him, arms held open. It wouldn't help him, however. She needed to save him, not serve herself upside along him. There was no telling how many more terrorists hid within the nearby buildings. "It's a human," the faunist said. "It's a huntsman." The other four looked nervously between themselves, but made no move to lower their weapons. Their muted conversation was too quiet to overhear, but eventually, one strode forward. "Just kill it," she called. Blake's breath caught. Her weapon slipped free from its holster in an instant, and despite her shaking hands, she trained it on the head of the woman who'd spoken. She'd never killed a person before, at least not so directly. The thought of it was enough to make her mouth feel dry. She took a deep breath, muscles relaxing, but the gun did not falter. Jaune killed for her, and so for him, she'd pull the trigger. "Don't be a fool," the first one said. "You want to kill someone in the middle of this place? You'll have to grim down on us in a matter of minutes. Besides, what do you think a young huntsman is doing here on his own? Asking for trouble? Moron," he scoffed. "Where there's one, there's more. Get over here and help me secure him. We'll let the boss decide what to do." The female faunist tossed her head, but made no move to help, leaving another to holster his weapon and do it instead. They approached Jaune carefully, but became more confident when it was clear the huntsman wasn't about to wake up anytime soon. They crouched down and hefted his body up between them, lugging him slowly away. Her weapon fell as her shoulders slumped. Relief was quick to be overcome, however, leaving only fear and a grim sense of determination behind. The question of what she should do was an obvious one. The answer even more so. There was no way she could leave him behind, not like this. But that decision only led to further problems. Did she attack now, though? Like they said, too much noise and disturbance would draw the grim down on them, and Jaune was unconscious, possibly injured. He'd been torn apart while he couldn't protect himself. It would also lead to a firefight, in which he'd be unable to defend himself. If she let him be taken away, then at least she could spring him loose when he was awake. Or when she could get him out quietly. Wise. She would know what to do. She drew forth her scroll and tried to call the heiress, only to curse angrily when no signal came through. She couldn't go back and get her team. Those people were already moving Jaune somewhere, which meant, even if she went back and got the others, they'd have no idea where he was. She had to move, if she wanted to keep up with them, which left her no time to decide. Blake scowled, snatched up his backpack and weapon and hurried after them. Their gallop was slow, especially with Jaune lugged between them, but they moved purposefully through the ruins, showing some familiarity with the area. For a while she was able to follow them looking down from above, but she had to descend when she saw a party of Grim ahead. There was no time to fight them, and the White Fang were traveling underground in what looked like to be some disused subway system. Her feet cracked against concrete, and she quickly ducked into cover lest they turn around. Fortunately, they were lost in their own conversation, chatting in an attempt to keep their spirits high. The faunist moved through a dark tunnel, cut off from all light and shrouded in darkness. It was a good place for them to hide, since Much like her, their eyes could pierce the darkness with ease. The rest of her team would have had trouble not tripping on the broken masonry that littered the floor. Eventually, however, a light revealed itself. A stifled gasp slipped past her lips as their destination was revealed. It was a large, open-topped area, converted of an old subway with several grey-walled buildings on either side. Train tracks, curiously in one piece, ran down the center of it. But it was the fully functional train that shocked her the most. Figures dotted around it, transporting goods into its carriages. Why would there be a train in Mountain Glen? This was a ruined city. Surely each train and every train would have been taken out in attempts to escape. Anxiety settled over her, followed by a muffled curse as she saw a white-coated figure by the train. It only got worse when he turned to those who approached. She ducked into an enclave between two of the apartment blocks, out of sight, but close enough to listen in. So, the headmaster had been right. Torchwick was here. "What is it, you animals?" The criminal sighed. "Can't you see I'm a little busy here?" "We found this, sir." Jaune's body was dumped down before the man, causing Blake to hiss. "We thought you might be interested." Well. Torchwick chuckled. "If it isn't a familiar face, it seems like you guys aren't all as worthless as I thought. Perry, grab a hold of him and follow me. The boy and I have unfinished business." Blake could only watch a larger fauna step forward and lift Jaune up into his shoulder. As he was drawn into a building, she pressed her back against the wall and tried to control her breathing. Okay. Jaune was still alive, though she didn't know for how long. If Torchwick wanted him dead, however, then he'd have done it then and there, and taken a bullet from her before he could so much as lift his cane. He didn't, and that meant she had time. How long? She couldn't say. She had to save him. That much was obvious. But the question of how was one that forced her eyes shut and sent a wave of panic shooting through her mind. How had it even come to this? This was supposed to be a simple mission. And why did Jaune wander off alone? Why had he risked his life to save hers? Tell me, kid. Can you honestly say he wouldn't put himself in front of a bullet for you? There's a difference between someone looking to kill themselves and someone who wouldn't hesitate to. She clenched her eyes shut and shook her head. No, that wasn't true. Just because Jaune wanted to look after them. That just made him a good teammate, a good friend. He wouldn't let himself be killed, even for her. Blake's hands curled into fists, shaking as she took several sharp breaths. She knew it was a lie even as she fought it. The docks, Weiss in training, and now this. She needed to save him. Once she saved him, she could talk to him, force him to understand that he was more important than that. Desperate for any help, she pulled out her scroll once more. Communications are still down. I have to do this on my own. But how am I supposed to beat Torchwick? No, that was foolish. She'd been many on a raid of the White Fang to break out captured comrades, and while Adam could have fought his way through, he always taught her the value of stealth and misdirection. It was one of the few things she appreciated learning from him. She just needed something to serve as a distraction, to draw their attention away. All she had was her weapon, Kuroka Moore's, and Jaune's backpack though. It was a stupid idea, but she knelt down and flipped it open. Maybe he had something, anything, that would help. As she unbuckled the catch and pulled it open, she drew the pack apart and looked into it. What the hell? Jaune had some serious explaining to do, but she fought as hope bloomed to life. Maybe she could make this work. Wake up. Weiss groaned and stirred a little as something shook her shoulder. Her brain was slow to respond, but as she tried to snuggle deeper into her blanket, it was torn from her body entirely, The chill air of the despondent and broken city they were in stuck like an avalanche. She was wide awake in seconds. "Yeah, Mr. Branwen?" Weiss corrected, surprised to see the man knelt by her, even more concerned with how his face, normally somewhat taunting, now looked like it was carved from granite. Her heart sank. "What's happened? What's wrong?" "Your boyfriend is missing," he said, the moody girl too. At any other time, she might have argued the term he used for Jaune, but the moment she was about to, her mind connected the dots on what he'd said. "What?" She gasped and lunged to her feet, only to get tangled in her sleeping bag halfway. He didn't even try to catch her, but instead strode away as she slammed against a nearby wall. "Missing?" he snapped. "Gone. Those stupid." "Ugh, get up." Blake and Jaune. Weiss's heart twisted in her chest, a strange sense of vertigo taking her as she tried to process the information. It took a few seconds, and that was only because of how impossible it sounded. If they were missing, then she had to find them. She tore herself from the bedding, dusted down her combat clothes, and rushed up to stand before Crow, fully awake. He eyed the equipment she was willing to leave behind, but didn't comment on it. Pots and pans could be replaced, even her new sleeping bag. There wasn't any time for storing all that away when half a team was in trouble. "I found some tracks," Yang panted as she leapt over a low wall and into the building. The blonde looked as worried as she felt, the largest frown she'd ever seen on her face. But she pointed in a direction she'd came from. They're pretty worn, and they didn't go far enough to follow, but it's a direction at least," she said. "Come on, we might be able to catch up." "Any sign of a struggle?" Crow asked. "None. It's just 2 pairs of footprints. They're like just up and wandered off in the middle of the night." Yang shot a worried glance towards Weiss, which the heiress returned. What could Jaune and Blake have left for? It didn't make any sense. "Maybe they went to bang," Crow grunted. "I heard about his rep." An unpleasant sensation shot through her at the suggestion, but she shook it off almost immediately. "They wouldn't." Weiss snapped. Jaune wouldn't do that to Blake, and she knew Blake wouldn't do that to her. It wasn't even worth considering. Jaune wouldn't leave us, not for anything. And I know Blake. Blake wouldn't betray us to the White Fang. She loves Jaune and the team too much for that. They were a family. A stupid family, but one nonetheless. Blake looked to Jaune like a father, and as bizarre as that might have sounded, it was the truth. Perhaps they saw something coming, Yang countered. Maybe they went to investigate. Maybe. The older huntsman didn't sound like he believed it. That was more likely, and more worrisome too. Blake and Jaune had been the two to rush off and do all that dangerous stuff with the White Fang, back before Blake confessed the truth and brought them into it. Surely, they wouldn't be so foolish to do that again though. They would have woken her and Yang up at least, right? To her frustration, her denial was not quite as immediate as the last. "You better not have," she scowled. "If you two ran off into another dangerous situation, I swear I won't stop with just a lecture like the last." Ow! Their heads snapped to the side, in time to see the small corgi Jaune had brought along, its face pressed against the ground. It sniffed and sniffed, then barked again and wagged its tail. Weiss's heart soared as she noticed it staring firmly in a particular direction. "Have you found the scent, boy?" she asked, rushing over to Yang's dog. It barked again and took a few hurried steps forward, then turned to regard them with excited eyes. "Huh," Crow grunted. "I guess the kid was right when he said the mutt would be useful. Yang, grab something from their packs. Anything that might have a scent on, as we might need it." Yang nodded and rushed over, rummaging among their things. "Jaune's bag isn't here," she called back a moment later. "I found one of Blake's bows, but his is gone." Weiss bit her lip. Why would Jaune take his bag? Was this some attempt to get away from them? No, it couldn't be. Weiss shook her head and frowned, her thoughts whirring. There was a reason. There had to be. She would trust in them. Crow spat. If this is his way of getting out of Osmond's deal... Deal? Nothing. He said, follow the tracks, and then take Zoe's nose as far as we can. Take only what you need. We travel light. Weiss nodded and hefted her weapon and nothing else. Yang did the same, strapping a water flask to her belt and then stepping up beside her. The ruined city sounded so quiet, so lifeless. It preyed on her every fear, reminded her of the cruel reality of what befell the people here, and what might have also happened to Blake and Jaune. She shook her head and tried to dispel it, but the fear lingered, clung to her like thick miasma. It made her heart race, her voice fail her and her hand shake. She had to hold on to what hope she had. But it felt so hard. Whatever you two are doing, look after one another. Please just stay safe. A dull ache throbbed through his skull. It was the first thing Jaune noticed when he came to, followed by the discovery that he was in a bright, stone-walled room. He tried to move his hands up to touch his head, but something bit into his wrist. Confusion settled for a brief moment, before the memory of what happened came back. He saved Blake from Fallen, but Fallen himself. Ironic, he supposed. A machine revved behind him, metallic crunching and grinding and echoing about the room before it settled into a loud, abrasive noise. Ready to die? A low voice asked, as a huge chainsaw was placed in front of his face. The blades moved too fast to be seen, but he could feel the air displaced by them on his skin. Talk about dramatic. Jaune sighed and rolled his eyes. If you wanted me dead, you wouldn't have tied me to a chair, nor would you wait for me to wake up. The man stepped in front of him, huge and burly with a white fang mask. He hefted the chainsaw in one hand, as though it weighed nothing to him. Are you so sure of that, human? Willing to bet your life on it? Yes. The Faunus paused at his casual response. He growled and spat to the side, and even raised the chainsaw above his head, as though to bring it crushing down on the huntsman. Jaune huffed and raised a single eyebrow, unafraid. Even if the man did it, what did he have to fear from death? He would lose his friends, and that hurt, and he could admit, but it wasn't a pain he wouldn't face in time anyway. He always lost them. The Faunus huffed and lowered his arm. The chainsaw came to a grinding halt. I told you he wouldn't be afraid, Perry. A far more familiar voice oozed. There's a few screws loose in this kid's brain. Roman emphasized the point by grabbing Jaune's head between his hands and shaking it. It hurt more than he expected it to, inducing some kind of lingering injury as he watched a flamboyant criminal stroll in front of him. Great. He'd been captured. Then, and despite his expectations, Roman apparently was arrogant enough to try and taunt him over it. He wasn't sure if that was a good or bad, even if it let him live a little longer. Will the others be able to find me? What's to stop Roman killing me before they can? Well, Roman drawled. Can't say I expected to see you again, kid. Maybe you're not. Jaune grumbled, more defiant than anything else. Maybe I'm a figment of your imagination. If so, Roman said, his hands coming down to grip the armrest of the chair. Then my imagination is about to become a very twisted place. Ooh, Jaune rolled his eyes. Spooky. He made sure to keep his expression bored, even if his thoughts were racing at a mile a minute. Blake was safe. That was a good thing at least. Maybe she'd have been able to handle the fall better, but with all the falling rubble, that wasn't a given. He'd acted before he could think. He just had to save Blake and not let her be hurt. Not let any of them be hurt. You're a regular comedian. Roman sighed and pushed back. I have to say, after that sweet little love letter I got from you, I was under the impression we were going to avoid one another. What do you call this? It's just a little field trip. How was I supposed to know you'd be in Mountain Glen of all places? I thought you had class, Roman. When did you turn to grave robbing? Roman started to chuckle. He stood up straight and turned away, building up into an all-out laugh. When it reached its crescendo, he spun back and slugged Jaune in the jaw. The blow made his head crack back, vision blurring as agony seared across his face. He toppled to the side and fell, shoulder crushing against the stone floor. Okay, he coughed. I can see you're in a bad mood. Very astute of you, kid. I am in a bad mood. Do you know why? Roman leaned down to grip the chair and sit him back up. I'm pissed. Quite justifiably, I think, because a certain brat saw fit to come and interrupt my plans. Again. Now tell me, is there a reason I shouldn't kill you right here and now? Jaune tried to smile. My dashing looks. He received another blow for that, even if Roman's foot caught his chair and stopped it from falling over once more. Jaune's head swayed. Gods. He was glad Ruby never had to put up with this. Then again, she hadn't been considered enough of a threat for it, and her team usually arrived earlier. It was a relief. He didn't want to imagine Ruby in so much pain. Try again, Roman hissed. You want my secret? Jaune said. You want to know? Yes. It's... Jaune forced himself to look into the man's eyes. It's about having a big penis. He grinned. And not wearing mascara. That's the secret of how I sleep with so many... Jaune grit his teeth together as Roman slapped his weapon between his arm and the chair, using it like a lever. It forced his left arm at an unnatural angle, making it feel like the bone would pop out of its socket. Sweat bead on his brow, but he refused to make a single noise. He wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I know there's more to you, Roman began. You wouldn't be out here alone, even if you are crazy enough to consider it. How many of you are there? Millions, he grit out. Roman growled and pulled his weapon out. Jaune breathed a sigh of relief for barely a second before the man took the weapon in two hands and swung it like a bat. Pain exploded through his shoulder. The force was enough to knock him over, and this time, the other man made no effort to stop it. The chair hit stone. His head cracked against it a second later. Jaune gasped for breath, but it became rugged when Roman's foot hit him in the stomach, driving it from his lungs. The metal cane came down another time, on his ribs and chest, and he instinctively tried to curl into a ball, only to find he couldn't. Every time it hit, his body shook, and the bindings around his wrists cut deeper and deeper. He forced his eyes shut and grit his teeth. You think you're so funny? Roman yelled, lifting his cane up and down with an almost rhythmic fury. You huntsmen think you're such heroes. You're not, and this isn't a game. You mess up in this life, and you'll die. Jaune couldn't help it. He started to laugh. Even as his body was wrecked with pain, he laughed and laughed. It angered his attacker even more, but that didn't stop him, nor did the heavier blows that rained down upon his body. You're mad, Roman gasped a few seconds later. The crook staggered back, red in the face. Sweat dribbled down his brow and he panted for breath. You're actually insane, aren't you? One sapphire eye cracked open. The other was swollen shut, the after effects of the beating having already taken hold. Insane? He whispered. I'm not the person working for a mad woman. She'll kill you, Roman. You're going to die. Roman would, if Jaune didn't die first. His head swam and he took great gulps of air. The pain was an ever-present reminder, but it didn't affect him like it once might have. What was this compared to the times he'd been tortured before? Roman was an amateur compared to Ironwood. Ironwood was an amateur compared to Cinder, and nothing compared to the pain of losing someone you loved. He felt the flesh burn from his own body, for crying out loud. What was this compared to that? "What do you know of her?" Roman growled, kneeling down and clutching Jaune's cheeks in his hands. "How do you know about all of this?" Torture lost its use once the victim accepted their death. For someone who didn't even fear it, the effort had been wasted from the start. Jaune spat a mouthful of blood into the man's face. "Nice try, Roman," he said. "I'll give you a 6 out of 10, but only for effort." "I will kill you," Roman threatened. "Do you honestly think I won't do it?" Join the queue. Jaune laughed. He wasn't going to reveal anything that might land his team in trouble. Even if he did end up on a moot point when he died, the world would reset, and they with it. Even so, he would never betray them. Even if it was for but a few minutes. Ugh, what a waste of time. Roman sighed. "What do you think? Want to kill him?" Was there someone else in the room? Jaune strained his neck to try and see, but the seat stopped him from doing so. He hadn't sensed anyone nearby, and his instincts were usually good. A white and black heeled boot appeared in his vision. Jaune sighed. Neo pressed her foot to the chair leg, causing it to slowly push him back up into a sitting position. The cute girl smiled cruelly as she inspected him. She even ran a finger along a cut on his cheek, and seemed amused by the smear of blood it left behind. "Roman?" Jaune said, keeping his voice light. "Is this your girlfriend? I don't do sloppy seconds if that's what you're offering." Neo didn't seem offended. If anything, she looked amused. The girl leaned closer to him, her head tilted to one side as she looked deep into his eyes. Whatever she was looking for, she apparently found it, for her eyes widened and she clapped her hands together. She turned and made a "wait here" gesture to Roman and rushed out of the room. Great. He sighed. Now what? A startled yelp came from outside, followed by a loud thud, before the girl bounded back into the room. He couldn't see her since the door was behind him, but he could hear the click-clack of her heels on stone as she skipped over to him. He froze as her small hands draped themselves over his shoulder from behind. Neo, more than anyone else, was just unpredictable enough to snap his neck right then and there. She didn't, however. Instead, his vision was blocked as she held something up against his face. He blinked through the eye holes, spirits falling as he realized it was a mask. There was only one type of mask readily available in Mountain Glen at the moment. He imagined that explained the noise too. He wondered if she instantly killed someone just to get it. Neo. Roman breathed. "Have I mentioned how much of a gem you are?" The girl laughed silently. Jaune could feel it against his back, but his attention was soon taken away as Roman kicked one foot up to rest on the chair right next to Jaune's crotch. "I thought you looked familiar, kid. I couldn't quite place it, but even when you were right there at that warehouse with me, something stood out. You were too calm, too distant." Roman shook his head. "Too efficient. No one your age, no matter how much a prodigy, can take so many lives so easily. You know how to fly a bullhead. You tore into those animals like they were paper. There's something very weird about you, and I intend to find out what." "It's nice to have dreams, Roman." Jaune chuckled. Roman laughed and pushed his head away, so that he fell and smacked against the floor once more. "You're pretty good at resisting pain," he said, "but there's more than one way to crack a person. Not a fan of it myself, but needs must, eh kid?" Jaune's eyes widened when Torchwick opened the bag, revealing several pouches of unidentifiable substances, along with some needles. No way. Panic shot through him and he thrashed in a wild attempt to break free. The restraints bit so deep they drew blood, but it didn't stop him. The chair clattered and moved across the floor, but came to a halt when Neo placed a foot on his chest. She smiled down on him, an amused and cruel smile on her face. You'd be surprised of how many of these animals are hopped up on this crap. Roman laughed. I guess it makes sense. Most of them know this is a suicide mission, a task for martyrs. Why go out in agony when you can do it on a drugged high? It didn't take Perry long to confiscate some. There are other ways to use them. Jaune thrashed, fighting to break free even as he looked at the needle with horror. Pain he could handle. He learned to focus past pain long ago. But what good was a mind when the body betrayed it? He had no idea what was in that concoction, but he could imagine what it would do, how it would pull apart his mind by affecting the foundations of his body. Patience, purpose, clarity. It would all be lost in a haze once that needle violated his skin and injected him with some junky feel-good concoction. No, he wouldn't just lose his ability to resist. He wouldn't even care if he betrayed his friends. Not until he came down among the ruins of Vale and his friends' deaths once again. No, not like this, not again. Roman turned with a syringe in hand, filled with some brown liquid. Not a massive fan of drugs myself, he said. Worthless fools who hide in some induced dream rather than face life itself. Roman gripped Jaune's arm. You brought this on yourself, kid. All you had to do was answer a few questions, and all of this business could have been avoided. The crook smirked. Last chance. You can start by telling me about your friends and we'll move on from there. Jaune stared at the needle, sharp and thin, with a droplet hanging from the end. His body shook, his eyes as wide as saucers. Inside, his stomach flipped and flopped, unprepared for the agony, or whatever this unknown drug would do to his system. He glared up at Torchwick and spat out his defiance. Fuck you. I won't tell you anything. I tried, Neo. I really tried. Roman sighed theatrically. I try so hard to be nice, and this is what I get. I guess, then, that I'll have to be the monster. Keep in mind, kid, I'm neither a practitioner nor a user, so forgive me if this is amateur at best. Jaune's skin burned as the needle pushed through. He could feel the cold liquid being injected, the agony as it seared through him. He grit his teeth together and tried to focus on the pain, to ignore all else. It was so hard. It felt like liquid fire injected straight into his veins, and it burned up his arm and towards his neck. Tears, something he long thought lost, brimmed at the corner of his eyes. When it stopped, and the needle was drawn free, he slumped forward, haggard breath coming from his lips. The stinging slowly started to diffuse, but he felt sick inside. That's one. Roman laughed and tossed the syringe aside. He rummaged in the bag and pulled out another, this time with a different fluid in it. Jaune's eyes widened. Oh, we're just getting started. Trust me. I want you nice and cooperative. The man smiled as he moved towards him and placed the new needle against his arm. Look on the bright side, kid. After a few more, you might even start to enjoy it.